Well, good morning and welcome to our online service for this, the 5th of March 2023. We're going to begin this morning with a psalm. We're up to Psalm 114 now. So let's read this together. So Psalm 114, verse 1. When Israel came out of Egypt, Jacob from a people of foreign tongue, Judah became God's sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled. The Jordan turned back. The mountains leapt like rams, the hills like lambs. Why was it, sea, that you fled? Why, Jordan, did you turn back? Why, mountains, did you leap like rams, you hills like lambs? Tremble, earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool and the hard rock into springs of water.
Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high.
So this morning we are returning to the letter to the Hebrews and the second part of chapter 3, which is verses 7 to 13. So as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion, during the time of testing in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested and tried me, though for 40 years they saw what I did. That is why I was angry with that generation. I said, their hearts are always going astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Way back when I was just 17 years old, I'd left school and I was on a YTS, the government's 2-year youth training scheme. It was kind of like having a 2-year apprenticeship, but with 1 day a week of learning. I worked at an advertising agency as a graphic designer. The company that organised the learning also set up a residential week, where those that were doing the 1 day a week learning would go off into the countryside to a residential centre, and while there, one of the organised activities was a 2-day hike with overnight camping. Now, I was quite up for this. I'd not long before completed the expedition for the Bronze Duke of Edinburgh's award. With that, I was walking 10 to 15 miles a day, camping out for 3 nights and all that goes with it. The residential hike was going to be easy in comparison. A 6-mile hike to a campsite, setting off at midday. I reckon no more than 2 hours, 2.5 hours maximum for a walk. We'd be there by mid-afternoon. Plenty of time to set camp, find the firewood and be comfortable for the night. What I hadn't done was accounted for my companions who had never done anything like this before. We set off enthusiastically. I'd been assigned as map reader because I'd done it before, and after about 25 minutes some of the party were already getting tired and they demanded a stop. I was saying to them that we need to walk on average about half an hour and then a 5-minute break in order to stay on track. But that wasn't how it played out at all. The further we walked, the shorter the walking time became and the longer the breaks became. We very quickly arrived at a point where the breaks were longer than the time spent walking. It was kind of like 10 minutes walking, 30 minutes break. The afternoon was slipping away and the hours passed by. Eventually, we rounded a corner and there was the campsite. What should have been a 2 to 3 hour walk became 8 hours. By the time we arrived at the campsite, the organisers were on the verge of sending out a search party. We then had to pitch camp in the gloom of dusk, and it was dark before we even got the campfire going. We were tired, we were hungry, and I was, to put it politely, frustrated with the rest of the group. But once the fire was going and we'd cooked some food, spirits lifted and all was well. Looking back at that, I can see a cycle of how things played out. A cycle of enthusiasm, mistakes made, complaining, and ultimately arrival and refreshment. Having made camp with the provision of food and a fire to warm us, we were equipped to finish the walk the next day, a mere 2 miles to go. But this describes more or less the wanderings of the children of Israel in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt. And as we've been looking at Hebrews, we can trace something of the same narrative sequence. We've thought about Moses and the giving of the law, and now we're thinking about the wilderness wanderings, the 40 years they all spent in the desert before, finally, they were allowed to enter the land that had been promised. During that time, they went through what the writer of Psalm 95 calls the great bitterness, the time of testing, when the people faced the test of whether or not they were going to trust God to provide for them, and they in turn put God to the test by demanding signs of his presence and care. Hebrews wants its readers to think of themselves as in some ways like that generation, walking through the wilderness on the way to God's promised future. They mustn't make the mistakes that the Israelites did. But it's not just a matter of thinking back to that tiring journey and deciding to behave differently this time. It's more a matter of that journey being a preliminary stage in a longer story, and the early Christians were finding themselves at the new stage of the same longer story. To make the point, the writer of Hebrews quotes from Psalm 95, verses 7 to 11. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if only you would hear his voice. Do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massah in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. From our current point in Hebrews 3 until about halfway through the next chapter, the writer is going to be coming back to Psalm 95 again and again. The psalm is a great call to worship and praise. It opens with a lively invitation to sing and make joyful noise. It celebrates the fact that Yahweh is a great God, the King of all possible gods. He is the rock of our salvation, the creator of heaven and earth. He is the shepherd, and we are the sheep. Our response ought to be to fall down and worship him. But with verse 7, the mood changes. The psalmist, writing many centuries after the Exodus, warns us that a new day is dawning in which it will matter decisively whether or not the people who hear this call to worship obey it or not. God had warned the people in the wilderness that if they grumbled and rebelled and put him to the test, they wouldn't be allowed to enter his rest. In other words, to find their settled home in the promised land. In the same way, says the psalmist, his readers are now facing this same choice. Either worship and serve this same God, or run the risk of missing out on the rest which is promised in turn. The challenge becomes more urgent with the use of the word today, the point in the psalm at which the quotation begins, and the point to which Hebrews returns several times, both in this passage and later. Along with the other early Christians, the writer believed passionately that God had acted once and for all in Jesus the Messiah, and that as a result the new day had dawned for Israel, which they had been waiting for. They had been living in what you might call tomorrow mode for long enough now. Now it was today mode, the moment when suddenly it was all happening. If only they would remember that, they would stay on track. There is much more exploration of Psalm 95 to come in the following passages, but notice especially the application that Hebrews makes at once in verses 12 and 13 of Hebrews 3. The writer of Hebrews is also aware that within every Christian community, even in the first generation, there are some who are in danger of going along with the others for the sake of companionship, but whose hearts weren't really in it. They were like people going on a hike because they were with friends, but who hadn't really thought about what clothes or footwear they would need, or what food to bring. So when things get difficult, their heart would fail them, because it had never really believed in the venture in the first place. Even 2 or 3 such people on a hike, let alone in a Christian fellowship, can cast a real shadow over everything else. Nobody likes to have to drag along a grumbling companion when you should all be giving yourself wholeheartedly to the task in hand. And it isn't just a matter of people who never really signed up in the first place. There may indeed be others who made a genuine beginning, but who need regular encouragement. And then there is the danger of being hardened by sin's deceitfulness. The deceitfulness of sin is very powerful. We start by allowing ourselves the apparent luxury of doing something small which we know we shouldn't, but which we think doesn't really matter. When it becomes a habit, we stop thinking it's wrong at all. If the question is raised, we're ready with rationalizations. Everybody does it. This is the way the world is now. You mustn't be legalistic. Don't be a killjoy. This creates a platform for the next move. Here's something else which a while ago we would have shunned as certainly wrong. But it's quite like the thing we've got used to, so maybe. And before too long, we're rationalising that as well. Once the mind has been deceived, the habit will continue unchecked. The main problem with which Hebrews is concerned, and with it the main deceit, is the question of whether or not we continue to follow and trust Jesus, or whether we will be content to drift with our initial belief fading away to a memory and our hope dissolving like the energy of tired walkers. Maybe we should never have come in the first place. Maybe we'll never find the campsite. This morning we are being called to hold fast to our faith. Where our gaze has slipped from the Lord and our attention has wavered, to refocus on him, to push onwards for his glory. So, let's take the opportunity for us to recenter ourselves on Christ, to refocus on what he has done for us, and what he calls us to do for him. Amen.
Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me now and evermore. Feed me now and evermore. Open thy the crystal fountain. Open now the crystal fountain, whence the healing stream doth flow. Let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me on my journey through. Strong deliverer, be thou still my strength and shield. Be thou still my strength and shield. When I tread